Welcome to the Deep Book Digest. Ever make a choice and then later you're like, what was I thinking?
Oh yeah, I think we've all had those moments where we wonder if our brain is working against us.
Well, that feeling, that's exactly what today's deep dive is all about. We're going to be tackling Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman.
It's a fascinating book. It's basically like a user manual for your own mind. It's about understanding the two systems that drive our thinking.
Two systems. So is this like the angel and devil on my shoulder battling it out for every decision I make?
Haha, kind of. Kahneman calls them System 1 and System 2. System 1 is like your gut instinct. It's fast, intuitive, emotional. It's what makes you swerve to avoid a pothole when you're driving.
Okay, got it. So if that's System 1, what about the other one?
System 2 is more deliberate and logical. It's slower, more thoughtful. It's what you use to solve a complex problem or plan out your day.
So System 1 is like quick reactions, and System 2 is when you actually sit down and think things through.
Exactly. And the thing is, both systems are important. They each have their strengths and weaknesses.
So how do these two systems actually work together? I mean, do they ever conflict with each other?
Oh, all the time. And that's where things get really interesting because System 1, that fast, intuitive system, it loves to use shortcuts. Kahneman calls them heuristics.
Heuristics, that sounds kind of technical.
They're basically mental shortcuts, rules of thumb that help us make quick decisions without overthinking everything.
Okay, so give me an example of one of these heuristics in action.
Let's try a classic one, the bat and ball problem. A bat and ball cost $1.10 total. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost?
10 cents. That was easy.
That's what most people say, but if you slow down and actually do the math...
Wait a minute, it's not 10 cents?
Nope, the ball actually costs 5 cents.
Oh wow, my brain totally just jumped to the obvious but wrong answer. I see how these shortcuts can backfire.
Right, that's System 1 at work. It's great for quick thinking, but it can lead to some predictable errors, like the availability heuristic.
Availability heuristic, another fancy term.
It just means that the easier it is for you to remember or imagine something, the more likely you think it is to happen, even if it's not actually true.
Oh. So like if you just saw a news report about a shark attack, you might suddenly be terrified of swimming in the ocean, even though shark attacks are super rare.
Exactly. Our brains latch on to those vivid images, making them seem more common than they really are. And it works the other way, too, with positive things. After watching a movie about winning the lottery, you might feel like you have a better chance of hitting the jackpot, even though the odds are astronomical.
So it's like my brain is a storytelling machine. It's always looking for patterns and creating narratives, even if they're not based on reality.
Exactly. And sometimes those stories are helpful, they help us make sense of the world, but other times they lead to biases and bad decisions. Like the representativeness heuristic, where we judge things based on how well they fit a stereotype.
Okay, I think I need an example for that one to really get it.
All right, imagine someone named Steve. He's described as shy, loves books, and is very organized. Is he more likely a librarian or a farmer?
Librarian, for sure. He fits the stereotype perfectly.
There you go. Your System 1 is firing on all cylinders. But statistically, there are way more farmers in the world than librarians.
Oh, right. So I'm letting that stereotype cloud my judgment?
And that's a big part of what Kahneman is getting at in this book. We're constantly making judgments and decisions based on these mental shortcuts and biases, often without even realizing it. Loss aversion. Loss aversion. What's that all about? Basically, it means that we hate losing things way more than we like gaining things. It's like losing $100 feels way worse than finding $100 feels good.
Yeah, I get that losing money definitely stings more than winning feels good. But so what? How does that actually affect our decisions?
Oh, it affects everything. Think about investing. For example, people are way more likely to hold on to a stock that's losing money than they are to sell a stock that's making money, even if it makes more sense financially to sell the loser.
Really? So you're saying I might hold on to a bad investment just because I don't want to admit I made a mistake?
It's not even just about admitting a mistake. It's a deep-seated emotional thing. Our brains are wired to avoid losses, even if it means making irrational decisions.
That's crazy. So how do I know if I'm falling into this loss aversion trap?
One way is to pay attention to how you react to potential losses versus potential gains. Does the thought of losing $50 make you way more anxious than the thought of winning $50 makes you excited?
Yeah, I think that's probably true for me. But so what can I do about it? How do I overcome this loss aversion bias?
One thing is just to be aware of it. Recognize that your emotions might be clouding your judgment, and then try to step back and look at the situation objectively. What's the most logical course of action regardless of how it makes you feel?
Easier said than done, right? But I guess it's like anything else. The more you practice, the better you get at it.
Exactly. And Kahneman talks about another fascinating concept that ties into this, framing.
Framing, like putting a picture in a frame. What does that have to do with decision making?
Well, it's about how the way information is presented or framed can completely change how we perceive it, even if the underlying facts are the same.
Give me an example. I'm not sure I'm following.
Okay, imagine there's a disease outbreak expected to kill 600 people, and there are 2 programs to combat it. Program A will save 200 people for sure. Program B has a 13 chance of saving all 600 people and a 23 chance of saving nobody. Which program would you choose?
This is tough, but I think I'd go with program A. At least I know 200 people will be saved.
That's what most people choose. Now imagine the same scenario, but the programs are framed differently. Program C will result in 400 people dying. Program D has a 13 chance of nobody dying and a 23 chance of all 600 people dying. Which program would you choose now?
That's interesting. The way you phrased it the second time, I'm more inclined to choose program D, even though it's the same as program B.
Exactly. The choices are objectively the same, but just changing the way they're framed, focusing on saving lives versus people dying, completely shifts our preferences.
Wow, so even when the math is the same, our brains can be swayed by how the options are presented.
Absolutely. And this framing effect is everywhere, from marketing to politics to everyday conversations.
So how do I protect myself from being manipulated by framing?
Again, awareness is key. Pay attention to how information is presented and try to reframe it in different ways to see if your opinion changes.
So it's like, I need to become a master of mental gymnastics, constantly twisting and turning information to see it from different angles.
Exactly. And that's a big part of what Kahneman is encouraging us to do in this book. One of the simplest but most effective is to just be aware of the base rates.
Base rates. Remind me what those are again?
It's just the statistical probability of something happening. Like, remember the Steve, the librarian example?
Yeah, where I totally fell for the stereotype, even though there are way more farmers than librarians out there.
Exactly. So if you just keep in mind those base rates, those underlying probabilities, you're less likely to be swayed by stereotypes or vivid anecdotes.
So it's like, before I jump to a conclusion, I should take a moment to consider the actual odds, the statistics.
Exactly. Ground your judgments in data, not just intuition. Another powerful tool is to embrace algorithms whenever possible.
Algorithms, like the ones that control my social media feed.
Not exactly, but you're on the right track. Think of algorithms as just step-by-step procedures for making decisions. They can be incredibly helpful because they take human emotion out of the equation.
Give me an example of how that works in the real world.
Well, Kahneman talks about the APGAR score. It's a system that was developed to quickly assess a newborn baby's health.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that. It's like a quick checklist to make sure everything's okay with the baby.
Right. And before the APGAR score, doctors just relied on their own judgment, which could be inconsistent and subjective.
So the APGAR score brought objectivity and consistency to the process.
Exactly. And it saved countless lives. It's a great example of how a simple algorithm can sometimes be more effective than even an expert's intuition.
So you're saying I should trust a robot doctor over a human one? I'm not sure I'm ready for that.
No, not necessarily. But the point is, there are times when removing human bias and using a structured approach can lead to better decisions.
That makes sense. I guess it's like, if you have a recipe for a cake, you're probably better off following the recipe than just winging it, even if you're a pretty good baker.
Exactly. So look for opportunities to use algorithms or structured approaches in your own life. It could be anything from creating a budget to planning a trip to making a hiring decision.
Okay, so algorithms and base rates. Got it.
Well, remember those 2 selves we talked about? The experiencing self and the remembering self?
Yeah, the one that lives in the moment versus the one that tells the story of our lives.
Kahneman argues that understanding these 2 selves is crucial for making choices that actually lead to happiness. Because the remembering self, the one that's in charge of our memories, it often gets things wrong. It focuses on peak moments and endings, neglecting the duration of an experience.
Oh, I totally do that.
Yeah.
Like, if a vacation has an amazing start and a terrible ending, I tend to remember the whole trip as being bad, even if most of it was great.
Exactly. So we need to be mindful of that. We need to make choices that satisfy both our experiencing self and our remembering self.
So how do we do that? How do we make sure both selves are happy?
It's a constant balancing act, but one key is to focus on experiences that bring genuine joy in the present moment. Things like spending time with loved ones, pursuing hobbies, being in nature. Those things might not always make for the most exciting stories later on.
Right. It's like everyday life doesn't always make for a great Instagram post, but it's what actually makes up most of our lives.
Exactly. And those everyday moments, those are the ones that truly matter in the long run.
This has been such an incredible journey. I feel like I've learned so much about how my own mind works.
Me too. And that's what's so great about Thinking Fast and Slow. It's not just a theoretical book, it's a practical guide to living a better life.
So any final words of wisdom for our listeners before we wrap up?
If there's one thing to take away from this deep dive, it's this. Be curious about your own mind. Pay attention to how you think, how you make decisions. Don't just blindly accept things at face value.
Question everything, even your own thoughts.
Exactly. And if you want to dive even deeper into all of this, I highly recommend picking up a copy of Thinking Fast and Slow yourself. It's one of those books that will change the way you see the world.
And don't forget to subscribe to The Deep Dive for more explorations of fascinating ideas and mind-bending concepts. We're always on the lookout for new knowledge to share, and we'd love for you to join us on the journey.
Until next time, happy thinking.